research for the summer. So I'm going to step over here and welcome Jennifer to the screen. As always, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Never a dull moment down in DC, that is for sure. We say that every week, but it seems like every week we've got something new to talk about coming out of the administration. And we kind of have a little laundry list here of what we wanted to discuss today. And kind of first and foremost, I think, is sort of all eyes on this sort of second attempt to repeal Obamacare. Looks like there might be some issues with it now, and it looks like it kind of boils down to protections of folks with pre-existing conditions. What's the talk and what's the outlook for the second attempt now to look to roll back Obamacare?
Well, I mean, as of yesterday afternoon, the general word on the street was that the Democrats needed only 2 more votes to ensure that the health care bill would not pass, and Mike Pence was deployed to the Capitol to try and make sure that that didn't happen. Mm-hmm. I think we're seeing a repeat of what happened a month ago, where the administration is so eager to say that they were able to repeal Obamacare that they're making these proclamations and these announcements before they actually have the votes lined up. And the pre-existing condition issue is the latest. And frankly, this is a situation where it's dead on arrival in the Senate. So the question is just whether the House will give Trump a partial victory.
And, talk with us a little bit about that. Last time we spoke, there was just, we thought something might be coming to a vote. And, how does the administration deal with this? Are they thinking that they can get the votes and are trying to get something through? I mean, you're down there all the time. I mean, how do they not know what the eventual outcome is going to be?
Well, I mean, I think that's the issue. They do know what the eventual outcome is going to be, and they're just not playing politics the way that normal administrations do. It's rarely the case that you announce that you're going to put something up for a vote if you don't actually have the votes. We see that Paul Ryan knows that. He's refusing to call for another vote until he knows that it can pass. Yep. And so I think people down here are a little bit surprised that the Trump administration didn't learn from the first time around that this is just not the way that you do things because it looks like a failure. The other thing that I would note here is that Donald Trump is trying to go very public and appeal directly to constituencies. We saw that when it came to the Pennsylvania delegation over the weekend at a rally. He called out members of the delegation by name and basically threatened them and said they weren't going to be back in 2018 if they didn't vote for the bill. So those are tactics that are usually employed when you know for sure that you're going to be able to get those people on board. And it's clear that the administration knows that.
And I mean, talk to us about exactly that tactic, as you said, going straight to the people, taking those members to task, threatening with the midterm elections. Is there any bite to this, to his bark? Do we expect, is this a strategy we haven't seen before?
Well, I mean, I think it's a strategy when you can actually be sure that doing it is going to deliver a victory for your party. So if we think back to the 1990s, Bill Clinton did this with Marjorie Margolis Mizvinsky at the time, and he needed 1 more vote for his budget. He convinced her to vote for it, and as she cast that vote, the Republicans in the chamber started chanting "Bye Bye Margie" because they knew it was going to cost her the election, but it was going to get Clinton the win that he needed.
Yes.
Here, it's a little bit unclear that even if the House votes yes, it gets Trump anything because we know that the Senate won't. So these members are probably less likely to go out on a limb for the party, because at the end of the day, it's not like they're going to have a piece of legislation that they can bring home.
Exactly. And here we are, as I called it version 2.0. If it doesn't go, what happens next?
Donald Trump will blame the Democrats, and he will blame the system, and he will blame the rules, and he will continue down this path of explaining that the way a bill becomes a law is fundamentally unfair to the president. And we'll have this conversation again in 2 months when it's Healthcare 3.0.
So you do expect that we'll see. And what if Healthcare 3.0 doesn't go? I mean, is this typical to see something go through so many iterations?
It's not typical to see something go through so many iterations in such a public way. I mean, usually we don't see how the sausage is made because it's not a flattering picture. The one thing that I will add here is that I think Donald Trump is aware of the fact that this might not be going as smoothly as he expected. That's why over the weekend, when he made a statement about focusing on North Korea as opposed to healthcare reform, he alluded to the fact that there are things more important than people's knee injuries. Now, I'm not sure that the 24 million Americans who would lose their coverage, or those that are feeling very threatened if they're not able to get coverage because of pre-existing conditions, consider their circumstances equivalent to a knee injury. And that could ultimately come back to bite them too.
Okay, so keeping all eyes on healthcare as we're at 2.0. If not successful, are we looking at 3.0? Let's tack a little bit here. The comments made by the president that a shutdown, a good shutdown, might be a good thing. What are people talking about that?
Well, I mean, we all lived through the last shutdown in Washington, D.C., where it's not roses, right? Like, I mean, it's not only that national monuments and national parks are closed, it's that there are furloughed workers who are not getting paid. There are people who are no longer able to participate in clinical trials because the National Institutes of Health has to cut off their funding. There are people all across the country that are not able to get passports processed. I mean, it just demonstrates a complete tone of good. The other thing that's fundamentally shocking to everybody inside the Beltway is the idea that a Republican president with a unified Republican Congress would suggest that a shutdown is a good thing. It's very difficult to shift responsibility and blame the Democrats when you control the entire government.
But, you know, as you pointed out, I mean, he's calling it a good shutdown. But maybe, is this par for the course with the President Trump who, you know, talked about draining the swamp, who's got sort of a distaste for sort of conventional politics? I mean, is there anything that could possibly surprise us from the president at this juncture?
I mean, the statements about the shutdown I still find a little bit surprising, because the one thing that he did try to convey on the campaign trail was that he actually cared about people and that his solutions were going to be a better way to make America great again and make people comfortable and happy. And whether you bought that or not, it seemed that all of his policies were wrapped up in this broader goal of making the country better. It's hard to imagine how you can describe shutting down the government and jeopardizing people's economic security, national security, certainly the city security in Washington, D.C., and still argue that that's consistent with your broader vision.
And his rationale for a shutdown, talk to us a little bit about that. You know, what is he looking to trying to achieve by these comments?
I mean, he said either last night or this morning that one of the upsides to the shutdown is we could figure out how to get rid of this filibuster once and for all. He basically, and we saw this with his interview with the Associated Press last week, and certainly with Face the Nation as well, he basically believes that how a bill becomes a law is not favorable to his positions. And he thinks that the compromises and the slow process by which legislation moves forward is antithetical to him achieving his goals. And ultimately, at the end of the day, he said that he thinks a lot of these rules are unfair to the president. Now, that's what checks and balances are meant to do. It's not meant to be unfair. It's meant to be sure that there is this balance, that the president doesn't have unilateral power. The notion that shutdown can somehow fundamentally shift that balance of power demonstrates, I think, a similar lack of awareness as to how the legislative process works.
Have we ever seen this from a president sort of, again, trying to say that, you know, I need the rules more in my favor?
No. I mean, I think it comes across, to be perfectly honest, as whiny and petulant. And it's one thing to make excuses in saying that the way that our district lines are drawn create disincentives for members to work together, or the way that we've gotten rid of earmarks or pork barrel legislation makes it more difficult to cut a deal. But to suggest that the actual legislative process is not fair to the president just demonstrates a complete lack of awareness as to how this process works and what the goals and motivations underlying it originally were. It also looks like sour grapes. And, you know, I think another example of this is when he said the other day that Chuck Schumer is a bad leader because he's unable to bring the Democrats along. I mean, Democrats would argue that Chuck Schumer is a pretty good leader because he hasn't brought any of the Democrats along. And so I think the way partisan politics works is surprising Donald Trump because the rules are set up so that even when you have unified control, it's not as easy as you might think.
Well, clearly we are witnessing that happening right now in D.C. As always, we like to talk about things that are in the media sphere, and the comments made by President Trump, the Andrew Jackson comments, seemed to sort of blow up yesterday, seemed to have died down a little bit today. Is this along the lines of a Sean Spicer, a comment that, you know, we see a lot of attention paid to it one day, but is it, again, does it add up?
I mean, I think this one was pretty bad because it demonstrated that we were talking not only about something that happened out of the United States, but most would argue that the Civil War was one of the most critical divisions we've ever seen in the United States, and Donald Trump fundamentally misunderstood who was involved and what had happened and why. The fact that he said that we should all sit back and think, why did this even occur, is somewhat striking. I mean, there are scholars and scholars and scholars who study this. There are historians who've made this their life work. There are volumes of books. There are thousands of accounts. It just, I think, highlighted that Donald Trump is not really interested in history or in nuance or in detail, and he's, more interested in these sort of like broad sweeping comments. And I think it's offensive.
Do you think this will come back to haunt him?
I think it can come back to haunt him if it's part of a broader narrative, right? If we tie the Civil War comment to the Frederick Douglass comment, where he suggested that Frederick Douglass is currently doing great things, it highlights, I think, a disconnect from the African American community and the plight of African Americans in this country. I also think that the lack of knowledge regarding the Civil War can tie into a broader narrative, similar to the kinds of things that Sean Spicer said that suggested that he didn't really understand the Holocaust or how that happened. So I don't think the comment in and of itself is necessarily damning, but you can imagine an ad run for the 2018 elections associating Republicans with Donald Trump, where it's just 30 seconds of completely offensive gaffes.
So what happens in 18? We are clearly in cycle. Republicans at the midterm, how do they manage this type of relationship of both backing the president in the cases that they intend to, and then seeing these types of, as we talked about, gaffes said by the president? I'm not asking for you to look into a crystal ball and pretend to be a GOP political strategist, but how delicate of a line is this to walk?
Well, I think at the end of the day, what we know is that every single member of Congress wants to get reelected, and that's far more important than making sure that the party gets what it wants or that the president gets what he's asking for. Mm-hmm. And so given the president's unpopularity and his approval ratings that are significantly lower than any other president at this time in his presidency, and the fact that Republicans know they're going to be associated with him, I don't think that the Republicans have much of an incentive at all to ensure that he accomplishes what he sets out to do. What they need to do is make sure that they remain in sync with their constituents. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that there are about 24 districts where Hillary Clinton outperformed Donald Trump and Barack Obama outperformed Mitt Romney, and Republicans currently hold those seats. We're already starting to see those members of Congress announce their retirements. And so the political landscape is looking good for the Democrats in the House, not so much in the Senate. But I think the Republicans have to keep in mind that if they want to hold this majority, they really have to do it in a piecemeal way where they make sure that they remain popular at home in their districts.
So as we've just hit on, again, Healthcare 2.0, talking again about things taking place in D.C., what's to come? You're finishing up school. You're going to be doing some research this summer. But, what are we looking for down inside the Beltway in the coming weeks?
Well, after this week, Congress is out of session again for a couple of weeks. They go back to their districts. I think the question will be, if they don't pass health care reform, if they're not able to repeal Obamacare in the next couple of days, are we going to, over the course of the next few weeks, see another round of these town hall meetings where constituents demonstrate to their members of Congress how unhappy they are? And then does that become the beginning of the debate over tax reform? Remember that they told us that once health care was done, they were going to focus on tax reform in the spring. Mm-hmm. It's already the middle of the spring. And then they were going to focus on the stimulus over the summer. At this point, they don't have any legislative accomplishments. And so, I think tax reform becomes the next issue. That leads into the stimulus. And if the Democrats can continue to let the Republicans fracture within themselves, then I think they're heading into the next election cycle on pretty good footing, and they're returning to their districts next week with pretty good news.
So a lot to keep tabs on down in D.C. We've talked a little bit the other week about research that you're working on this summer, so we're excited to talk with you more about that. So wish you a good week now that school's over down at American, and we'll, of course, look forward to picking your brain after we see what transpires this week down in D.C.
Thank you. I'll see you next week.
Okay, Jennifer Lawless, down at American University, professor of government, director of the Women in Politics Institute down there, parsing the